Hello everyone, welcome back. We haven't had a webinar here coming out of MEC and talking to you about SARA for a long time. I'm glad to see we've had so many people decide to join us. As you'll note today, we have all of our friends from NC-SARA with us. Those of you who've been on for a few minutes got some more information on the previous slide about the logistics for today. But we'll go ahead and talk about what's going to happen and get on with things. First of all, I want to thank all of my colleagues at MEC who have lent all their technical and financial support to this endeavor. This is an NC-SARA webinar, but orchestrated and brought to you by MEC today. Foremost among the people who are responsible for bringing you this webinar is Mary Robertson. You see her right there. She's the brains of the operation when we do these webinars. And of course, Emily Jacobson, our NC-SARA coordinator, who is second only to Mary on these matters. We have the star of our show today, Marshall Hill of NC-SARA, and his right-hand man, Alan Contreras, the national coordinator for NC-SARA. And then, of course, I'm there, coming to you again. Nice to have you all with us again. Actually, that's not the right picture. Kylie was going to be with us, but actually it's Sandy Doran who's with us today. But Kylie helped us do the dry run last week. She's from NC-SARA. I'm having a little bit of trouble with my slides here. Okay. We also have Mary Larson with us today from SREB telling us about SARA in the South. We have John Lopez updating us on how things are going in the West. And of course, a lot of you I know have asked me about this guy. Russ Poulin's going to tell us what's going on the federal front. So a lot of great information today. This is roughly the structure of the webinar. Those of you who've been with us before know that you can chat and ask some questions. There will be a nice question and answer period at the end where you will actually hear some verbal answers to your questions. And of course, we will follow up as we usually do with written answers to the questions so that you do have a follow-up document with this. Also, as you might have noticed already, the PowerPoint presentation is already posted on our website where the webinar link was posted, and it will remain there, the webinar, the live webinar, and just the PowerPoint and the accompanying documents in the future. We have a 90-minute webinar today. The first part will be an update on SARA across the nation, and then we will have our federal update from Russ Poulin and Marshall Hill, and then we will have third an update from Alan and Marshall on policies and standards updates, including data, supervised field experiences, and professional licensure disclosures. And then, of course, everyone's favorite, the question and answer period. So let's get started. All right, we have an update, and we'll start with Marshall Hill. He'll give us an overview of how SARA is going from a national perspective.
Thank you, Jenny. It's nice to deliver such good news. As of today, we currently have 20 SARA states all across the country. We are expecting to have 25 SARA states by the end of June. We picked that time because a number of states are working through legislation that they need to pass in order to join the initiative. We are optimistically but fairly confidently anticipating having 30 to 35 SARA states by the end of this calendar year. Next slide, please. So it's great to have the states join, and as you all know, once a state joins, it invites its eligible institutions to participate. That process takes a while. States very often have to develop rules, get the rules approved through whatever the state's process is, and so forth, then invite institutions to participate, process those applications, and then approve them and let us here at the NC-SARA office know about that. But we currently have more than 200 institutions that have signed on to participate in SARA. We those of us doing this work question this next bullet point. This 2,000 number is quite optimistic, and I admit it comes from me. It's aggressive, it's assertive. We think we can do that, especially with the help of those of you who are on the webinar today. I'm occasionally asked what kinds of institutions are participating. As we planned from the beginning, all types of institutions are participating. I'd say the largest number are public institutions, followed by independent nonprofit institutions, and lastly, independent for-profit institutions. We have small and large institutions all around the country. Next slide here. I think there we go. So this shows the distribution of current SARA states, 20 of them. And the next slide adds to that those states that have in green that have either passed legislation or don't need to pass legislation. And then the next slide, the final map slide, includes in gray those states that have this spring introduced legislation in order to enable their participation in SARA. In addition, there's some good news in a number of states for which you don't see a colored-in version at the moment, but I'm going to let our regional directors talk about that. The next final slide for me is to remind you all that you can contact or look at our website and see the state actions table. This is a factual statement. This is not our estimation or our guess or our belief about actions that states might take, but these are actual steps that states have indeed taken. It's a conservative statement. Legislation introduced, legislation passed, and for us that means it has passed both houses of a legislature and been signed by the governor. The NA indicates that this is a state that, to our knowledge, is able to move forward and participate in SARA without passing legislation. Basically, some entity in the state has already been given the authority to do something like SARA. The next column, the state then prepares its application and sends it to the state's regional compact. And then lastly, the action of that compact is to approve or disapprove a state's application. Once that happens, the state can invite its institutions to apply. When they do, they fill out the same application all around the country that's approved or disapproved by their state, and then it is the institution is notified that it is approved and that they can pay their SARA participation fee to NC-SARA. As you probably know, many states or all states that join SARA are provided the option to charge SARA participation fees to their institutions. About half of the states that have joined thus far are doing that, and about half are not charging a fee. Basically, it varies considerably dependent upon what the state already has in place. I'm going to stop at this point with the general comment that those of us who have participated in the SARA initiative from its earliest stages thought that if after a year we had 10 states, we would be very, very pleased. And after just about a year now, we have 20 SARA states. So we're quite pleased with how we've done. I'm going to turn it over to our next speaker, who I believe is Jenny.
That in the Midwest, we have been very lucky and very successful in bringing on board a number of participants for SARA. I'll start with the state of Illinois. Illinois is there it is right now. Thank you very much to whoever did that for me. Illinois is anticipating submitting its application to the Midwestern SARA Steering Committee sometime this spring, maybe into the early summer, and possibly open a portal agency. Now, this has been amended since last week because I double-checked with these folks. It does take a long time to get rules approved in Illinois. So they're looking at actually opening a oh, thank you. Someone gave me a chat. You can hear me. I'm glad to hear it. So Illinois is looking at opening a portal agency later in the year. They might be able to join SARA sometime this late spring or into the fall. But there's a difference between necessarily joining as a state and having a portal agency that then their institutions can apply to. And again, I can get you more information on that if you want to call me specifically and ask about that, because it's difficult for them to know at this point what the exact timeline will be. But rest assured, we have every indication that Illinois will be in by the end of 2015, and Illinois institutions will be able to participate by that time. So it's very, very exciting. Indiana, of course, continues to be our powerhouse. They have the most institutions across the nation, and they were the first SARA state. I was just there a few weeks ago doing a workshop for them, and they're still enthusiastic and excited for every new state and every new institution that joins. Iowa passed its SARA enabling legislation last year, but it needs some fine-tuning, and they're working really hard in Iowa to make that happen. We don't know exactly what kind of timeline that will be, but of course I'll keep you updated. Kansas is already a member. They became a member of NC-SARA back in November of last year, and they have really started cranking out some applications. I get a lot of calls from Kansas institutions. Kansas has the distinction of being the only state with a fully online portal agency, which I thought was really cool that they had gone ahead and invested that time and money into that. Michigan has filed its SARA enabling legislation, and it's working its way through their legislature right now. They don't anticipate any type of hurdles to that, so we are looking for them to pass that legislation in the spring and possibly submit their SARA application this summer. So Michigan's coming on this year as well. Minnesota joined SARA in January, and they already have a lot of institutions joining. Minnesota has the distinction of being kind of the first highly regulatory state to join, and so we're very, very excited to have them with us as well. Missouri joined back in November as well. They also have a lot of institutions coming through the door. For those of you, I've had a couple of questions from folks in Missouri. There is a $500 fee a state fee in Missouri, and each state has the ability to choose a fee that enables them to run the SARA endeavor in their state. I do sometimes get questions about what are the differences there. Well, that's the difference. Some agencies are funded by appropriation. Some have different ways of funding the people who have to do the SARA work. It's still a lot less expensive than the old system, so we're really excited about all the agencies that have been able to establish themselves. And if they need a little bit of remuneration to do that, that's great. Nebraska is a member, and they have a lot of institutions that have been coming in as well. Their fee is $300 a year. North Dakota, of course, was the second state. They have the distinction of being the state where all of the eligible institutions have joined now. So they've reached full saturation. Very, very exciting. It's our goal to do that as much as we can in every other state. We want as many institutions to take advantage of SARA's benefits as we possibly can. Ohio was admitted this spring and will be putting together and coming online with its portal agency sometime this summer. Ohio is really the first high-density state where we have tons of institutions who can benefit from SARA, so we're really, really excited about that influx of members. South Dakota is a member of both WICHE and MEC, and they have, just as North Dakota is joining with MEC, South Dakota is joining through WICHE and has already become a member. Wisconsin is still investigating the best way to create a portal agency. They don't have a natural entity there, so it's going to take a little bit more time for them to figure out how to move forward on that. And Pennsylvania has SARA enabling legislation that's been introduced, and we have started having discussions with Pennsylvania about what it would look like if they decided to join SARA through MEC and NC-SARA. So there is your Midwestern update, and I am going to turn it over now to Sandy Doran from NEBI.
Thank you, Jenny. I appreciate it. So welcome, everyone. It's been a very exciting and productive 12 months for the New England region New Hampshire was the first state to join last November, and as of today, they have 6 institutions that have joined, which is terrific. Our next state that will be joining is Vermont. Vermont has submitted their application to our regional steering committee, who is in the process of evaluating it, and assuming that everything is in order, it will be admitted sometime this spring. Rhode Island and Maine have both have legislation that has been introduced jointly by both House and Senate, which is very important because, as we know, then there's no reconciliation needed. The more exciting news as well is that in both situations, it was voted unanimously out of committee and will go forward to the full legislature. Connecticut legislation was filed this spring as well. Again, there was a unanimous vote out of committee, and so that will move hopefully to the full legislative body. And in Massachusetts, we're still working with all stakeholders. There are a tremendous number of constituents here, a tremendous number of institutions, so that we're hoping when Massachusetts is able to become a SARA state, then that will really offer tremendous benefits both to institutions and to students outside of the state and inside the state of Massachusetts. New York and New Jersey, also unaffiliated. New Jersey, we have a great deal of interest from the Secretary of Education, Commissioner Hendricks, Secretary Hendricks, and so she is working with various constituents there to move that forward. And New York, most excitingly, is the Board of Regents has asked and voted unanimously to ask the commissioner there to move forward with whatever legislative appropriations are needed in order to effectuate SARA in the state of New York. So with that, I'll be open to questions later on in the seminar, but for now I'll turn it over to my colleague.
Hi, this is Mary. Can you hear me? I'm going to assume that you can, and I'm going to go ahead and get started. Alabama is having state discussions. We do anticipate that they will not be able to be joining in 2015 because they do need to have legislative change. Arkansas has submitted their application to SRAB, and the steering committee should be reviewing that sometime next month or the beginning of May, so that we hope that they should be part of SARA by July 1st. Delaware is having ongoing discussions.
Mary, could you speak up a little bit?
Sure. Is this better? Okay.
That's better, yes.
Delaware is having ongoing discussions, and we anticipate that they will be participating in SARA, but most likely because they too need legislative change, it will be 2016. Florida and Georgia both are having statewide conversations with all the stakeholders. In both of those cases, it will be somewhat of a delay because of the way the structure of their education system is with all the different agencies involved.
Mary, you're trailing off again a little bit, if it's a little bit low.
Okay, I'll try and speak directly into it. Maybe that'll help. Kentucky is having statewide conversations, and they too need legislative change. Louisiana was a member as of October 17th last year. They're getting ready to review Louisiana institutions with their board, and from there they will be sent on to NC-SARA. So we anticipate there will be some Louisiana institution participation within the next month. If somebody can move the slide, that would be great. Thanks. Can you go back one? In Maryland, there is also ongoing conversation, but it too will need to have legislative change. If you notice, there's a pattern here with the majority of the SRB states. They need to have legislative change, and in part that's because their legislation was created to allow participation in SRB's electronic campus regional reciprocity agreement. So many of the states need to go in and change that legislation to allow for participation in SARA. Mississippi is having conversations. North Carolina, they will need to present to their Board of Governors. They do not need legislative change, but they will need to have regulatory change. Oklahoma is one of the states that does not need legislative change, and we anticipate having their application in May. South Carolina will need legislative change, and we anticipate continued conversations with them. Tennessee has introduced legislation. It has not been signed by the governor yet, so therefore it still shows as legislation being introduced. Next slide. Texas actually has introduced legislation, and this is a recent update, and we anticipate, if everything goes well, they will be participating in 2015. Virginia and West Virginia are both members as of last October, and the District of Columbia will be affiliating with SRIB for the purposes of participating in SARA, and we anticipate having their application sometime this spring. In all of the SRIB states, at a minimum, there's conversations going on, and there are state meetings being held. Marshall and I are available, and we've been visiting most of the states as requested, and we anticipate being able to answer your questions, and either that or else do a state visit for you. And I'm going to go ahead and sign off, and I'll be available for questions later, otherwise in the chat room. Thanks.
This is John Lopez, and I'll just start in on the update for the Western region. And this will be relatively quick because we've been very fortunate to have a lot of cooperation and policymakers, institutional reps come forward and support this effort to the extent that you'll see there Alaska, Arizona are members. California, the SB 634 has introduced. Things have been going quite well. In fact, we're in the middle of preparing for a hearing coming up. So there's quite a bit of activity there in California. You see that Colorado is a member. In Hawaii, legislation has been passed. There are ongoing discussions internally to identify a portal agency and just the internal structure for the state to join SARA. Idaho, Montana, and Nevada were fairly early members. So things went quite well there. New Mexico just in the last week passed legislation, and we are anticipating that the state would have its application to us in the next few weeks. So congratulations to New Mexico. North Dakota, as you know, is a member, is a SARA state through the Midwestern Compact. Oregon approved. We already have several institutions from that state. South Dakota is a member, again, and that was approved at the same time as the state of Oregon last fall. In Utah, legislation was passed a while back, and again, that's one of the states that continues to have internal discussions related to a portal agency and how best to structure the state to participate. Washington is a member, an early member, and we have several institutions participating from that state. And Wyoming, again, last month, the bill was signed by the governor. Things are progressing there, and we anticipate an application in the next few weeks. So we've been very fortunate in the Western region. I'll be available to answer any questions.
Hi, everyone. This is Jenny again. Now we're going to move on from the national and regional updates on to an update of what's going on at the federal level. I get lots of questions about this. We all do. And, excuse me. And so we brought Russ Poulin in today to help us with that. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Russ.
Jenny, thank you for inviting me here today, and thanks to all for joining us here on this webcast. I think they asked me to work on this one because I've been involved in following the federal regulations and what's been going on with that ever since they came out in October of 2010. And that last year, Marshall Hill and I sat on the negotiated rule-making session where they were trying to bring back this regulation. And so we'll go through just a brief bit of history and give you some foresight on, I guess, where we think that this will be going in the near future. Anything I say in terms of looking forward is all sort of speculation because we hear different things as we go on. And so with that, I'll start with this was the what you see on your screen is the regulation that came out in October of 2010. This was a surprise to us that they came out with this, but it's a fairly simple thing, as you can see here, that if you're offering distance to correspondence education in another state, so that's pretty easy to figure out. And then let me move forward to the next slide. That there was the expectation that you meet any state requirements, and while and then what they were looking at was that they were going to tie federal financial aid for students in that state to you having the proper authorization in that state. So let's say that you're an institution in Ohio and you want to serve a student who is in Illinois, that you would have to have either show that you have an exemption or authorization or some sort of approval in that other state to serve those students in order to give the federal financial aid. And so really what they were doing was leaning on the state regulations that were already there and just saying that they were going to check to see whether you had those or not. And then if you want to get that full language there, and it's really just these few sentences that I do have the URL put in there so that you can get those later if you need. So that regulation came out in October 2010. However, that was challenged by APSCU, which is private sector colleges and universities, and that was then vacated by the courts. Now, it's important to note that they challenged it on 2 counts. They challenged it on 1, saying that the Department of Education could not have such a rule, and the second count was that saying that they did not use the proper notification. And what happened was that the courts, both the first level of federal courts and also the appeal courts, found that yes, indeed, that the Department of Ed could issue such a regulation, but that they had not followed the proper notification, so it was really set aside or vacated on a technicality. So what does that mean, that it's vacated out there? So really what that means is that at least for distance education, or meaning that if your institution's in one state and you're serving students in another state, that there is no federal regulation for that right now. There is no federal deadline for now. I still hear people say that, oh, well, for distance education, we have to have everything in place, all the approvals in place by July 1st of 2015. And actually, that's not true because the federal regulation has been set aside. However, and put that in big letters there, the states still have their regulations. Remember, the federal regulation was based upon the state regulations. Those regulations have not been set aside. The states still expect you to comply prior to you doing the first thing that they want to regulate in that state, whether it's enrolling students or advertising in the state or what have you, or holding face-to-face meetings in the state, or practica in the state, or any of those sorts of things that they regulate. They expect you to still be in compliance. So again, no federal deadline, no federal regulation at this time. Still find some people confused about that. However, that we have seen all sorts of signs, and even they're telling us that they do expect the regulation to return, that they do plan to bring it back. In fact, I told you at the start about the negotiated rulemaking. That was certainly a clear attempt to bring it back, because they put it on the table for us to bring it back, and that was a failed effort last year, that we had to come to agreement as to what would be in the rule. That rulemaking committee was unable to come to agreement, so nothing came of that. The upstart of that is what happens is that now, since part of that rulemaking, that since we didn't come to agreement, that the Department of Education can issue whatever regulation it wants, but we do think it'll be informed by both the rulemaking negotiations, the discussions we had last year, plus subsequent discussions that we have. And so we're still expecting something to come out here in 2015, that they'll try to bring that regulation back. What might be in it? What might we see in it? Here are some things. Again, I have no direct information from the Department of Education other than my talking to them, and they're hinting and that they would deny all of this is the case. But here's what I would expect to see. So this is all on Russ. I would see clear support for reciprocity. Everything that they have said is that they support SARA. And every once in a while I hear people saying, oh, well, will they support it? Or what happens if they don't support reciprocity? I would be more shocked than anyone. Everything that they've said and everything that they've done is clearly in support of reciprocity, and I think that they would reiterate that in whatever they come out with. There was a lot of talk about exemptions for active duty military and their families, which is partially good news because it's good news in that it would exempt you from the federal rule, but you would still be subject to the state rules, and so we need to work with the states to try to get that so that we can have active duty military and their families and maybe some others exempt wherever they are, and so that more would need to be done on that. So at least that issue's on the table. They understand it. We need to move forward with that. Really expect to see, in terms of licensure programs, nursing, those sorts of things, that there'll be more requirements, more stringent requirements in terms of licensure. And then a good thing was that it defined what the home state is for students who are in foreign countries who receive aid, and that's sort of just a clarification in there. So those are some things that we expect to see in there, and I'm sure there will probably be some other things that maybe we're not expecting. From the negotiated rulemaking, things we're hoping not to see in there was that for institutions who are allowed to get exemptions in other states, that they wanted to do away with that. We hope that that's not the case. So again, if you're the institution in Ohio and you want to go to Illinois, and Illinois exempts your type of institution, that they would say, no, Illinois has to actually review you or to go through some process on that. And so we're hoping that that goes away, and that's not something that they will want to. That was something the department was pushing for during the rulemaking. We're hoping that they won't have that. And then there was another part that was kind of not good in terms of that if you lose your authorization in the state, that you would immediately lose your federal aid. Well, if you're a bad actor, that certainly makes sense, but there's all sorts of situations where we've seen where a state has changed their rules, and then all of a sudden, because they changed the rules, all institutions are suddenly out of compliance. That would mean you'd lose all your federal aid in that state, and that there needs to be some more leeway in that. And so we're hoping that doesn't show up. And so don't worry too much about these until they come out. If the bad things come out, we'll let you know. But those were some bad things that we saw in the negotiated rulemaking last year. Just quickly, again, this is a timeline that's again, to Russ, that's not something that we've heard for sure. I would think that they would have to come out and issue a new regulation for public comment, and that's the process. They have to put it out for public comment. We look at what they say the new regulation is, and that we can give advice back to them, and we would want to get everybody involved in commenting back on that. And we're thinking it would have to be late spring or summer, because what happens is that they have a bit of a deadline of the end of October of this year to get the final regulation out. So they have to do the public comment, they have to react to those public comments, come up with a new regulation, get that out by Halloween of this year, if they want to start enforcing it by July of next year. Now, what the date would be in terms of when colleges would have to be in compliance, I don't know. It certainly wouldn't be July of next year, but that's when the regulation would go into effect. But we would, they could have some date farther down in a couple of years or so, in which all institutions would have to finally be in compliance. So we're not quite sure when that would be, and so I've heard different things on that. Just one last thing here. Everything I talked about before was with the Department of Education. Just wanted to throw in, for those of you who offer tuition assistance for those who are eligible, who are in our military services, that is this part that's in the new memo of understanding about that they're expecting that you follow state authorization if you are offering tuition assistance to people. So that is something that is in the MOU right now. With that, I'll turn it back to whoever's next. So back to Jenny. Thanks.
Thanks, Russ. That's awesome. The federal stuff gets really confusing sometimes, so it's really important for us to keep people updated, and you're our best resource for that. For those of you who don't know, Russ has an awesome blog on this, and I highly recommend keeping up with it and having it, flit across your screen every week or so, because it really is the best way to keep on top of these things. Okay, so we're going to move on to part 3 here. We're going to have Alan Contreras and Marshall Hill talk about some things that are updated and new in SARA this year. There was a big meeting. Twice a year the National Council meets. It met in Atlanta on December 2nd, and there were some new things that came out of it, and there are also some new things just coming up in general as we continue to grow and thrive and things kind of fall into place. So here you go, Marshall and Alan, take it away.
This is Alan. I will certainly do that. The main issue that has been discussed quite a bit in recent months has to do with what is and is not covered under the SARA Supervised Field Experiences section. One of the questions we had was whether the limit of 10 students means you can only put 10 students in a state, and the answer is no. It's 10 students per academic program per physical site. What that means is if you have 10 nursing students and 10 medical students, you can put both of them in the same hospital, for example. So that, we hope, clarifies that issue for most people. When your state joins SARA, any existing contracts that you have with a supervised field experience site are not affected by SARA. The only time SARA goes into effect is when you revise those contracts. Now, I should mention that when I say it doesn't affect SARA, you don't have to suddenly start abiding by the requirements that are in SARA for the 10-student limit, but you are covered by SARA for purposes of field placements, clinicals. And I want to make very clear everyone understands, looking at that third bullet there, it doesn't matter if the supervised field experience is part of an online program or part of an on-the-ground program. SARA covers cross-border supervised field experiences of whichever origin you have them. There's one circumstance under which a local institution can raise an objection, and that is if you want more than 10 students per program, per site, you have to get permission from the host state's SARA portal agency, and in that situation, in that situation, local institutions can object. But as long as you don't have more than 10 students per academic program, per physical site in another SARA state, you're fine. We are working on a number of other issues that I won't go into great detail now, but I wanted to let you know. As Marshall is fond of saying, we're done with the easy stuff. And some of the not quite so easy stuff that we're working on right now have to do with how SARA affects the arrangements that you might have with an FAA-certified flight school. There are certain issues involving hybrid programs. There are certain issues involving dual credit programs that operate at high schools and things of that nature. We are working on all of those. My hope and expectation is that we'll have a whole string of new FAQs and a couple of new policy statements coming out of the SARA National Council meeting, which will be the first week of May. And with that, I think I'll pass it on to whoever is doing data collection here. Marshall, I think that may be you.
I think that is me. SARA requires 2 data submissions, one from institutions and one from state SARA portal agencies. Let me talk about the other one first because that will come first. SARA portal agencies are required to report on a quarterly basis the number of complaints that have been appealed to that agency in regard to complaints about the state's institutions. So I'm sitting in Boulder, Colorado, so that would mean that the Department of Higher Education in Colorado, which is the SARA portal agency, will on a quarterly basis report any complaints that have been received by it against CU Boulder. Students are required to go through the institution's complaint resolution process before they can access that SARA portal agency appeal process. Those of us who have done a fair amount of work in helping resolve student complaints don't expect these numbers to be very high. The first reporting for that will come, actually we'll start that next week. We've been working with an outside IT firm in order to design the software for that. We saw a demo on it this morning, so I believe we'll be able to have it out next week to the 20 SARA states. I'm expecting that as of this point, frankly, there will not be any complaints against SARA institutions that have worked their way through an institutional process and then been appealed to a SARA portal agency. But nevertheless, we're going to regard this as our big initial test run for this. We've designed it to be as simple as possible for the portal agencies to report. And then we will aggregate all of that, and it will be on our website, reported by institution. What the majority of you are probably more interested in are SARA's institutional data collection policies. So starting in this coming fall, we will ask institutions to report their enrollments in other states, in states other than their own. So as you see this example here, this will be what the reporting will look like when put on our website. So Alaska is a SARA state. SARA institution number 1, let's assume for the moment that that's the University of Alaska at Fairbanks. It will report the numbers of students that it is enrolling in each SARA state. And we will report them directly on our website, as you see here. They will also report to us their enrollments in other states, and we will total those up so that those are reported separately. And then lastly, their total enrollments out of state via distance education. This will start shortly after institutions are required to put in their federal IPEDS submissions. Institutions will have to have this information in order to do their IPEDS submissions. That raises the question of why don't we just get it from IPEDS? That's because IPEDS aggregates to a greater degree than we will. It has institutions just report its total out-of-state enrollments, not breaking them down by states as we're going to do this. At the present time, there is a tentative plan for having institutions disaggregate those enrollments by broad program area, such as 2-digit zip code. We're giving that more thought to determine whether or not that would indeed be useful enough to justify the significantly increased reporting difficulty that would require. My last comment on this is that like almost everything about SARA, it's important to understand that SARA is a result of negotiated compromise. There are some people that would like to see SARA collect a great deal of information, and there are some people who would like SARA to report and collect no information. We're closer to that latter point. We do believe it's important to demonstrate whether or not we're having an effect on the goals that we have, and to make that known to other people. I think I'm finished.
Okay, I think it's
Jenny,
Alan's
back to
turn.
you.
He's going to talk about professional licensure disclosures.
It is indeed. The issues around licensure have become among the most complicated that we talk about, partly because, and I want you to look at the red text there, SARA does not cover any regulations that come to you directly from a professional licensing board. For example, what SARA does is remove from the burden of a state's education agency oversight of you, that is to say that all the physical presence stuff and all of the program oversight you might normally have to do. What it does not do is say to the Illinois Board of Nursing or the Oregon Psychology Board or the Teacher Ed Board in South Carolina that you can't have standards that affect the people who are placed in your state in clinicals and things like that. So what we tried to do is describe that clearly in different ways, and I think there's still a need for some improvement there. But the bottom line is, if you are going to have students who are seeking professional licensure in another state, students that are in another state from where your institution is, you are still going to have to abide by whatever the professional rules may be coming out of those licensing boards. Now, the way that SARA has approached this, in order to make sure that communication happens, is that we are allowing you to do two different options in how you work with your students who are in professional programs. Option one is if you already know that your students in your program are eligible for professional licensure, or that your program provides something that the licensing board accepts in the state the student is in, then you can go ahead and tell the student that. Or if you know for certain that it doesn't, you can tell the student that too. In some situations, you may not know the answer to that question. When we were working on SARA, we were informed that one state simply refuses to say whether certain online programs will meet their standards, and you have to guess. And that obviously is perfectly silly. But in that circumstance, you can use option B, which is to inform the student that you, the institution, do not know whether the program or the course or whatever they're taking meets the licensure requirements pardon me, in the student's state of residence, and provide the student with whatever information is needed so the student can find that out. The bottom line is, one way or another, you have to communicate clearly with the student regarding whether your course or your program does meet the requirements in that state. And that this is an area that I think the U.S. Department of Education is also getting more interested in. My guess is that you're going to see more and more oversight of this kind of thing, partly because there have been some very unfortunate cases that have come up in which the communication did not occur, and the student took a bunch of courses or even a full program and then discovered that they could not be licensed and things of that nature. So I think I'll stop there and we'll move on. And certainly any questions about this, you can send me an email or whatever you'd like to do.
Okay, well, I think that brings us to the question and answer time here. So generally the way we do this is we look at some of the most pressing questions that are coming up in the chat, and I go ahead and try to farm those out to people. So the first thing I wanted to do is there were just some specific questions about specific states. So I'm going to there was one question about the territories, though. I think the specific ones about the specific states, I will encourage people to talk to their regional directors about those, whether they're comments or questions. But there was a question about, are there any other territories that we're aware of that are in the process of looking to join SARA, or is it only D.C. at this time? I'm wondering if that's an Alan or a Marshall or some other person who can answer that.
Well, this is Marshall. I'm not aware of other other territories or districts that are at present taking steps to join SARA. There's discussion probably in all of them, but nothing, to my knowledge, has materialized at this point.
This is Alan. I haven't heard anything other than what Marshall just said. I did hear early on that the Northern Marianas, the territory out in the Pacific, was not going to be proceeding at this time, but that was a year ago, and I'm not sure where they are now.
Thank you. All right, just to remind everyone, this is Jenny talking right now. If you have questions, you can send them in on the chat. Obviously, if you have specific ones for your regional director, please contact that person directly. A question that came up today on the chat and is always out there is, how does SARA treat dual credit courses? Thinking that's an Alan question.
Alan, you still with us? We may have lost Alan. This is Marshall. We need to take an additional look at that. What we have assumed up to this point is that dual enrollment courses, which obviously by definition should carry along collegiate credit, would be covered by SARA, at least for that. Certainly for that part of the issue. Whether or not the K-12 agencies or districts or whatever in a particular state may or may not have additional requirements that must be met, we just have to take we have to look at that more, and it's on our list of things to do.
Thanks, Marshall. Yeah, I'm not sure people always know how many issues that we do grapple with, but we ponder them in all of their permutations for months at a time till we figure out the most logical and rational course for them. And dual credit is one of those issues. I know a bunch of people have been asking for some various lists and some various websites. So I'm going to mention them right here, and then I'll see if some of our chairperson and some of the other people can get those lists out. People wanted the link to where state fees are on the website. Those are listed on the NC-SARA website. So yes, we'll get that link out for you. They also wanted to know, how do you tell which institutions have joined, are participating in SARA in each of the states? You'll need to click on the SARA map on the NC-SARA website. When you click on the blue states that are member states, they have the list of the currently participating institutions, so we can get that link out to you. And there was some confusion about the difference between a state fee and the NC-SARA fee. There was even one question that said they didn't understand, does a state fee mean that in that other SARA state we pay that fee? Marshall, would you like to explain that?
Sure, glad to. There is one definite SARA fee and the possibility of a second. The definite one is the fee that every SARA institution pays to NC-SARA. And those fees are $2,000 for institutions with 2,500 or fewer FTE enrollments, $4,000 for institutions with enrollments between 2,500 and 10,000 students, and then $6,000 per year. Each of these are annual for institutions having more than 10,000 FTE enrollments. These are total institutional enrollments. We're occasionally asked, why don't you base your fees upon an institution's out-of-state distance education enrollments? That is a very good question, a logical one. That's obviously what we should do if we could, but we can't because there frankly isn't good enough verifiable data to use that. The basic premise is that the larger institutions can afford to pay a bit more. Then that's the mandatory fee. And then the possible other fee is a fee that a SARA state may choose to charge its SARA participating institutions in order to cover needed work at the SARA portal agency. As I indicated earlier, it looks like about half the states are doing that, and half or so are not charging a fee, at least at this time. We have that information posted on our website, and Jenny, we can get the link to that state fees provided to you, so you can include it along with the webinar notes.
Jenny,
thank you very much.
This is Alan Contreras. I got knocked off for a couple of minutes, and I think it was right in the middle of you asking me a question. Was there a question I needed to answer?
There was, but Marshall did a very nice job. He talked about dual credit. But hey, Alan, you can answer this one. There have been a couple of questions and some confusion about non-degree granting institutions. Can they join SARA, or how are certificate programs treated under SARA?
An institution that is not a degree-granting accredited U.S. institution cannot participate in SARA. An institution that is a U.S. accredited degree-granting institution that is participating in SARA is covered not only for its degree programs, but for its certificate programs and things of that nature. There is some discussion about whether there are any exceptions to that situation, maybe in situations where a certificate program had some special state regulation over it, things of that nature. But in general, if you are a degree-granting institution that's participating in SARA, your certificate activity is covered.
Thanks, Alan. That's great. All right. Here's another kind of in-the-weeds question, but that's what we're here to answer, because this is the stuff that trips people up at the institutional level. I know that from having experienced the work they're doing. There's a question of, what does it mean when you say there's a student in one state attending an institution in another state? How does an institution, and this goes both to what Alan has said about was answering some questions using this verbiage earlier, but also Marshall was talking about data reporting. I think the question is really about, how is an institution defining its online students? It's students who are coming in as SARA students and reporting them. How does an institution make that determination?
Well, the distinction is where the student is physically located relative to where the institution is physically located. SARA only covers things that are happening across a state line. So if you are in Indiana and you have a student who is from Indiana who is going to school somewhere else, I mean, what matters is that they're in different states. The institution has to know where the student is physically located. Where the student came from doesn't make any difference if they have moved to your state to go to school. I hope that helps, at least in part.
Yeah, I think people were wondering, is there a difference between where the student's located and what the student notes as his or her state of residence?
What matters for SARA purposes is where the student is physically located at the time they're receiving the instruction that is being offered under SARA. And the reason for that is that SARA does not cover any instruction that occurs inside the state where the institution is located.
Right. Thanks, Alan. We had a question on here about how does SARA help institutions located in a SARA state and trying to advertise or recruit in another state? Do you have a quick summary for folks about how much that does or doesn't open up things for them?
Well, it helps a lot. This is Alan. If you are a SARA institution and you are operating in another SARA member state, all of your advertising and things of that nature are covered. There's no, you're not going to get in trouble for a billboard or something like that. SARA covers that kind of activity. That's
great. We had another data question. the question is, for the reporting of online enrollments in non-SARA states, is that a total aggregate or is that an aggregate by state? I think that's for Marshall.
This is Marshall. The way we're going to do that is we're going to ask all SARA institutions to report to us their enrollments in each state in the country, territory and district. And then we are going to report it in the manner that you saw on an earlier slide. That is, we are going to report that institution's enrollment in each SARA state by the name of that state. Then we are going to aggregate all of the other states and report that as one total number. The reason we're going to do it that way is that will allow us, as additional states join SARA throughout a year, and we're only asking for these enrollments to be reported once per year, we will then be able to pull out by institution what their enrollments were in those additional SARA states that join. So if institutions were reporting now, we would be reporting their enrollments in 20 states. If they report all this information, then when the 21st state or 22nd or 23rd is added, we will then adjust our reporting on our website by pulling those enrollments out. That will show a greater movement, and we won't have to have a wait of a year before we'll see the effect or the actual magnitude of SARA enrollments in other states.
Thanks, Marshall. It looks like I've got a question here that Russ could possibly answer. Someone wants to know if there's any chance that the federal regulations on professional licensure disclosures and notifications will mirror or somehow affect the requirements under SARA. Do you have any ideas there, Russ? Have you heard anything?
Well, I think there's certainly been conversations with Marshall and with me and others with the Department of Education about what we'd like to see in those. So it's hard to say what will come out from the federal regulation. I'll leave this to Marshall, but it may end up being the other way, that there'll be something that will be slightly different in what the federal regulation comes out, and SARA may have to react with that. But we're doing what we can to inform the Department of Education at this point whenever we can, but something different may come out. Marshall, would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, let me add just a bit to that. I think that's exactly correct. I do believe that Russ's presentation of his view of what's likely to come out certainly mirrors mine. And the department senior staff have shown consistent and unflagging support for the work that we're doing with SARA. Nevertheless, they may have something that comes out in a rule which will require us to adjust. Obviously, they don't have to accommodate us. I think they will as much as possible, but we certainly have to accommodate any rule that the department comes out with. One likely difference, SARA relies, for example, on this notification process in regard to programs that lead to licensure. The department may come out with a rule which goes beyond notification, maybe requires a student's acknowledgement of receipt of that notification, for example. If the department comes out with something like that, we will make modifications to SARA requirements in order to be compliant with them.
Thank you. So still on the topic of professional licensure, someone is asking, what is the definition of a program that leads to licensure? Is this just programs that automatically result in a license when they are completed, or does this also include those that might require an exam or some other steps once the person is seeking the actual license in the state where he or she intends to practice his or her profession?
So this is Alan. I think that's a very good question, and we don't have an extremely precise answer to that. In general, what we've said to institutions is that if you are marketing your program, if you have a program or a course that is clearly designed to help a student become licensed in a particular profession, then you need to make sure that that student can actually do whatever it is they need to do. And what they need to do is going to vary quite a bit profession by profession, and even state by state within a given profession, these things can be different. So there is not really a black and white answer to that right now. I think once the feds move a little further downstream on this issue, we are going to need to revisit this topic and spend a little more time and energy on it.
This is Marshall. Let me add just one thing. I agree with all those points Alan made. This is a wonderful place to apply the golden rule. You know, do unto students as you would have somebody do unto you. How would you like your son or daughter to be informed as to whether or not the courses, the program that an institution is offering will enable her to sit for a licensure exam, and apply that. Disclose as much as is needed in order to have them make a fully informed decision.
Marshall, there's an additional question where I think you can add just another comment to what you just said. Someone asks, at what point do you disclose this to the student? At the application stage, the enrollment stage? How would you advise?
Well, I think what I would advise is again, do it as soon as possible in the process. I don't see any downside to not doing that. We're doing all of this to be helpful to students as well as to be helpful to institutions. So let students know as early in the process as possible whether or not the course program they're enrolling in or want to enroll in or considering enrolling in would enable them to sit for licensure in their state.
And the only thing I would add to that is that at a minimum, if you are about to charge somebody any kind of significant tuition or fees for something, they certainly ought to know at that point. If this is just an inquiry, if the student's already enrolled, they're a pre-major taking nothing in particular, and they happen to ask about something, I don't think it's any big deal. Certainly, if you get to the point where you are charging students money for something that may not be useful to them, based on that information, that at a minimum at that point they need to know.
And this is Russ, that a lot of the language I've seen is around prospective or existing students, and so it's not waiting all the way up to the point of application, that the student has to be able to discover that as they're considering your program or not, and that I would expect to see that sort of language come out in the federal regulation as well.
I agree.
Thank you, guys. All right, on a slightly different tangent, folks, I've had a couple of questions now asking, do any of the program integrity regulations or really any of the state authorization rules apply to international students?
This is Marshall. No. Alan, go ahead and amplify.
Well, I don't. Yes, no. I don't think that certainly nothing in SARA applies to any international provider. The federal rules I can't comment on, but really none of this is intended to cover that kind of situation.
Well, you're mentioning of federal rules does cause a possible qualification. There are possibilities for institutions, U.S.-based institutions, to enroll students abroad and have them participate in federal financial aid programs. My guess would be that the department's rules in regard to this program integrity issues would cover those kinds of situations as well. Remember, everything that the department does in regard to this kind of regulation is around the provision of Title IV funds and applies to institutions that are participating in them.
Let me try this. This is Russ again. the thing to remember is that this is all about student location, not who the student is, not what the student is, et cetera, et cetera. It's all about student location. So that question, we could parse that out into, if you have an international student who is in their own country, the state and federal laws don't apply, but you may need to know what the rules are of that country. So that's a whole other thing. Let's say that you have an international student who is taking a course from you within the U.S. but from another state. That state could decide, if you did something to that student and they weren't happy with it, that state, the consumer protection folks could decide to come after you, even though it's not a citizen of the U.S. I believe that they could start investigating you and seeing what to do about it because you did something to a consumer within the state. So there are things that could happen. Just always remember that you need to follow the rules of wherever the student is located.
Yep, the corollary to what Russ just said is that ultimately the state you are in, setting aside a few institutions that are tribally chartered or federally chartered, the state you are in is responsible for what you do because they are the ones who are your principal chartering entity or your licensing entity, and that ultimately are responsible for your actions. So if an institution behaves wickedly in Argentina, eventually the state may come looking for you.
Thank you, guys. All right. Here's a little bit of an easier, more straightforward one. Someone wants to know, does SARA cover recruitment and admissions for athletics?
SARA, well, first of all, the NCAA covers it rather thoroughly. What SARA does is covers any regulations that would be placed on your institution by the educational regulatory agencies in the other SARA states in which you might be recruiting. So you are off that particular hook. But we have nothing that SARA does has anything to do with the NCAA rules, which in this case I think are the big gorilla. This is not really my area of expertise, so there may be others out there who know more about what the NCAA does than I do.
Thank you. Okay, we do have some confusion out there about the fact that the 4 regions create one contiguous system of reciprocity. So I think they're asking if you are if you are not a SARA member or participating institution and you need to apply to your state, there's some confusion about that process. Do either of you, or do you want me to go ahead and just kind of narrate quickly what an institution does and what an institution gets from
Go ahead, Jenny.
attempting to join SARA?
Go ahead.
Okay. So if you are in an institution and you and your leadership have decided that SARA is a good option for you, which in most cases it's going to be, what you do is you would fill out your SARA institutional application and you would submit it to your state's portal agency. And that portal agency you can find on the NC-SARA website. You submit it, possibly pay the state level fee, provide them with the information, and go through the process of being approved for participation in your state. At that time, a notification will be sent to you and to NC-SARA, and you will be able to sign up in the NC-SARA database, and you will receive an invoice. You pay your NC-SARA fee, you go on the NC-SARA list, and then you are a participating institution for all SARA states, meaning maybe your institution is located in Missouri, but for the other 19 states, you are able to engage in SARA covered activities regardless of region. And as SARA states are added, you will have SARA privileges in those states as well. I think that's what this question is asking, but I did just want to make sure that we clarified that because sometimes that is confusing, especially if you're in a state where there isn't a lot of SARA buzz yet. Did you guys want to add anything to that?
Only that there occasionally is some confusion about whether an institution joining in a SREB state has SARA privileges, I think is the word you used, a good one, only in the SREB region? And the answer to that is no. Any SARA institution can operate under SARA provisions in any other SARA state around the country.
And this is Mary, and I would just say that as long as SREB's reciprocity agreement is still current, the institution, if they were both a SARA institution and a SECRA institution, would have both reciprocity agreements to work under.
Thank you, Mary. All right, yes, please, any of the other regional directors, chime in anytime, please. All right, here's a question. Is it possible to break down any further the numbers of participating institutions? Are any for-profit institutions, have any for-profit institutions joined? Does that sector have any interest? And is there any breakdown anywhere by regionally versus nationally accredited institutions? So just some general inquiry there on the patterns of institutional participation. I would think that would be a Marshall question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We haven't done that at the moment, and I'm not sure that we would have to separately collect from the state agencies or either do it ourselves institution by institution as to whether or not the institution was nationally or regionally accredited. Just going by my looking down the list of institutions, the 200 plus that are SARA institutions, the majority of them, or the highest percentage of them, are public institutions. The next largest percentage are independent, nonprofit institutions, and I think by a fairly good distance, the smallest group are the independent for-profit institutions. There are some of those that have enrolled. I can't give you a count at the moment. You could look at that state by state by going to the NC-SARA website, clicking on every state, and just taking a look to see the lists yourselves. But we haven't at this point done that. I'll look into seeing whether or not we can do that easily or not, and we'll try to respond to that.
Thank you, Marshall. We've got a couple of questions about clinical placement. There was some confusion about to which portal agency would someone at an institution ask to have more than the 10 people, more than 10 people per program per site. Which it wouldn't be the institution where it wouldn't be the portal where the institution is located, but the portal in the state in which you're placing the students.
That's
assuming
correct.
I have that correct, Ellen.
That's correct. And
Yes.
this is Marshall. And the reason for that provision was for example, someone as we were deliberating this brought up the idea that a institution in one state would be offering some sort of clinical program in another state in which that program did not exist, and maybe that second state had a desire to train a lot of people in a particular area in which they did not have a program. If you live in California or New York or Texas, you don't come across that issue, but Wyoming, Idaho, North Dakota, the Dakotas, and so forth, perhaps that is. So the second state or the institutions in that state might have no objection whatsoever to placing 30 students in a hospital. So there needed to be a process to enable that to happen if it was logical, made sense, and approved by that second state's portal agency.
Thank you, Marshall. We're getting close to the end here. I've got a few more questions, but I just wanted to let folks know, as usual, we will follow up with these as well. When you signed up, we got your contact information, and we will be sending out our follow-up. So you just mentioned your example with the 30 students, Marshall. I think someone might have been confused. I'm going to read this question to you. It says, at the beginning of the webinar, there was a mention that the state authorization would only apply to those states that had 30 or more students attending a school. So if we only have 8 students from Iowa attending our school as distance ed students, would we not have to be authorized in Iowa? So I'm not really sure what's being asked there, but maybe this is.
Yeah,
well,
I'm not either, and there was maybe some misunderstanding there.
Yeah,
I don't recall.
Okay.
In the very early days of SARA discussions, there was some discussion of whether there was some kind of minimum below which neither we nor the individual state would care. That never made it into any of the final policies or standards of SARA. And at this point, I mean, if you have one student in a state that regulates distance education with any vigor, then chances are you're obligated to go through whatever the laws of that state would require. So there isn't any minimum right now that I know of. There may be individual states that have a minimum, but there's nothing at the national level that I'm aware of.
Right. Okay, so that's what they mean by in the beginning. This is someone who's been following this for a while and is probably referring to the beginning of the discussion of reciprocity, not the beginning of the webinar. Sorry for that confusion.
Yep. Makes sense.
Let's see. Does SARA have anything to do with transfer of credit?
Yeah, this is Marshall. No. No, the acceptance of transfer credit is subject to the institution's own policies and the particular laws of the state in which the institution is located.
Okay.
Jenny, I see one question that I'd.
What about go ahead.
I see one question I'd like to answer. This is from Sue Hochberg, asking why are we having institutions and so forth report to NC-SARA rather than to the individual state portal agencies. The answer to that is because many states told us that it would be a significant burden for them to have to collect this additional information from their own institutions. So we decided we would collect that for them at NC-SARA and then make it available not only back to those portal agencies, but to anyone and everyone. And paying for that is something that the institutional fees support.
Thank you. All right, let's do one more question. Says if a student enrolls in an institution that is located in a SARA state, but then the student enrolls, the student is in a SARA state and the institution's in a SARA state, but then the student during the program of study relocates to a non-SARA state. What type of state authorization is the institution on the hook for?
This is one of the trickier ones that has come up. The bottom line is always that you have to abide by the law of the state where the students are located. If a student moves partway through a school year or something, it's pretty rare for a state agency to want to make anything of that, even the more highly regulated states. But if a student does move to another state that's not a SARA state, and continues enrollment, then you, the institution, are certainly obligated to deal with whatever the laws of that state are as soon as you find, when you find out the student has gone there.
All right. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Marshall, Russ, Sandy, John, and Mary. I appreciate you coming together for this update webinar. We're going to try to make sure that all of you folks out there continue to get timely and some interactive webinars and updates from NC-SARA. Look for these questions to come soon. If you've got some specific questions about your region, please feel free to reach out to your regional director, or if you reach out to the wrong one, we'll pop you over to the right one. Any other concluding comments from anyone?
No, thanks, Jenny.
All right. Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.